Okay, so we're starting here on page 26, and we start with atque ille, and he. And this is referring to Isilius. And he's described as lacrima bundus, which is an adjective that means tearful or in tears, something like that. So you could say, and he, in tears, says, inquit, and then he says, gratum est, it is welcome. Now, what does this refer to? What is welcome? The thing that is welcome is the offer from all these strangers of contributions for Virginia's bail money, basically. Okay, so he says, he's basically saying, thank you for your offer. And then he says, Krastina die. Now, krastinus is an adjective to do with tomorrow. So literally, krastina die is an ablative phrase that means on the tomorrow day. So in English, we would just say tomorrow. Tomorrow, I will use utar, that's the future tense of the deponent verb utor, to use. Tomorrow, I will use vestra opera, your services. And then he says, there is now, est nunc, there is now enough of bail, satis sponsorum. Now, Latin uses this, what's called a partitive genitive. So Latin says there is enough of bail, genitive case. In English, we would just say there is enough bail. And that's the end of his speech, right? Ita Virginia vindicatur, and so Virginia is freed. And then we have an ablative absolute, propinquis spondentibus, with her relatives bailing, right? And that's not an English verb. So in English, we'd have to say providing bail or something like that. Okay, Latin actually has a verb for this, spondere. So, okay, in the next sentence, we have a new subject, appius. Having delayed for a short time, moratus paulisper. So paulisper means for a short time. Moror, morari, moratus sum means to delay. So here you've got the perfect participle of this deponent verb. Quick side note here. Remember, there's a difference between morior, moriri, mortuus sum, and moror, morari, moratus sum. Morior means I die, whereas moror means I delay or hesitate. Okay, so Appius, having delayed for a short time, and then we have ne introducing a negative purpose clause. So that he would not seem, right? Remember, the passive of videre, to see, can also mean to seem, right? So that he might not seem to have sat, right? This is the perfect infinitive of sedere, to sit down. And in this case, it means to sit in the legal sense, right? A judge sitting to hear cases. Okay, so that he would not seem to have sat for the sake of that matter, eius rei. Okay, so this is a construction that we talked about a few lessons ago. Causa in the ablative case plus genitive means for the sake of something. So in other words, Appius doesn't want to just leave straight afterwards, because if people think he turned up only for the Virginia case, people might suspect that he knew about it in advance. So he has to sort of sit around pretending to wait for other people to bring him legal business to talk about. Okay. So having done that, okay, and then Livy now also explains to us why no one did talk to him, right? So after, postquam, after no one approached, postquam nemo adibat, right? After no one approached, With aliis rebus, his an ablative absolute, with other matters having been omitted, right, having been ignored, compared to the care of the one case, prae cura unius. In other words, the public cares so much about the Virginia case that they've forgotten any other business, any other legal business they might have wanted to talk about. Okay, so after all that has happened, Appius recapit se, literally took himself back home, domum, that means to home, homewards, you could say, took himself back home. And this is where he gets even more nasty. And he writes, right, so you've got quet meaning and then scribit is the main verb, and he writes to his colleagues, collegi, dative plural, in the camp, in castra, literally into the camp. So he writes to the camp to his colleagues, you could say. And what he's telling them is this, ne dent. Now, ne here is introducing a negative indirect command. So that's why dent, from the verb dare, to give, is in the present subjunctive, right? He's writing to them to tell them not to give comeatum to Virginius, right? And comeatum means a leave of absence, or that's sometimes called a furlough, F-U-R-L-O-U-G-H, right? So they shouldn't give Virginius a leave of absence. Why not? Because he's hoping that Virginius will fail to turn up at the trial, and then he can declare Virginia a slave. Okay, so he's telling them not to grant a leave of absence to Virginius, and even atque etiam, to hold him, habeant, to hold Virginius in custodia, in custody. Right, so he's even going as far as to tell them to imprison Virginius to stop him getting back to Rome in time for the trial. But then Livy says that his improbum consilium, his wicked, his nasty plan, fuit serum, was too late. Serum just means late, but in English we'd probably say too late. It was too late. And then Livy adds a sort of moral comment, ut debuit, that means as was right. In other words, you know, in other words, that was a good thing, right? It was a good thing that Appius's letter arrived too late. Okay, so it arrived too late, and Virginius et Virginius profectus erat, had set out already, in the first watch, prima vigilia, that means in the first watch of the night, in the first period of the night. And then we have an ablative absolute, comeatu sumpto, literally with a leave of absence having been taken. So basically, Virginius has already asked for his furlough, right? He's already asked for his leave of absence, and therefore, you know, he's already gone, right? Now this phrase, as I say, vigilia refers to sort of a period of time of the night. Okay, so he's gone in the sort of late evening or something like that. And then we go to cum postero die. Okay, so since, that's cum, since the litterae, the letters, de retinendo eo, about detaining him, right? You'd expect eum here, accusative, but it's actually ablative because this is the gerundive attraction, where eo has been attracted into the case of the gerundive retinendo. Okay, so the letters about detaining him are delivered, reduntur, in vain, pointlessly, nequiquam, early, mane, early, on the next day, postero die, right? So Virginius is leaving the camp at the beginning of the night, and it's only the next morning that Appius's letter arrives telling his colleagues to keep Virginius in the camp. Okay, let's now go to page 28, and that's the start of chapter 47. At in urbe, but in the city, and urbe of course refers to Rome here, but in the city, prima luce, at first light, ablative time phrase, i.e. at dawn, when the citizen body, cum civitas, was standing, staret, in the forum, in foro, and then here's a sort of ablative phrase, with their expectation stirred up, expectatione erecta, with their expectation stirred up or urged on, something like that. And what happens? Virginius, and he's described as sordidatus, that means he's dressed in mourning clothes. He's wearing the kind of clothes that you wear when you're grieving for a loved one who's died. And that's where the word sordid comes from in English. So Virginius, dressed for mourning, cum ingenti advocatione, with a huge, literally advocacy, with a huge following, a huge group attending him. What did he do? He deducit secum, he led with him in forum, into the forum, his daughter, filiam, and the daughter is described as being with worn out clothing, obsoleta veste, literally with obsolete clothing, that would mean worn out clothing, and with aliquot matronis, with several married women as companions, comitantibus. Right, why are they dressed like this? Why is Virginius dressed for mourning? Why is his daughter wearing worn out clothes? This is to try to get sympathy from other people, right? It's a way of showing your kind of humility, your desperate situation, and hoping that people will pity you and help you in response. Okay, and then the last sentence here, there, ibi, circum ire. Now this is another historic infinitive. In other words, you translate it like an imperfect tense, circum ibat. Right, so there he was going around. We might say he began to circulate, and he began to prensare, to sort of canvass people, homines, right, to sort of ask them for their support. In fact, no, sorry, forget what I just said about historic infinitives. They're not. In fact, the word that I translated began is coipit. So let's start that sentence again. He began, coipit, to circulate, circum ire, and to canvass people, prensare homines, and not only, non solum, to beg for, orare, to request, precariam opem, charitable help, help that people would give just because they feel like it, but in fact said to ask for it, petere, to ask for help, pro debita, as something owed, right, as a help that is owed. In other words, Virginius is not just asking for a favor, right? He's not just saying, please help me and my daughter. He is actually calling in people's obligations. He's saying to people, I've helped you in the past, right? And you told me that if you ever needed, you told me that if I ever needed anything, you would help. And he's saying, now is the time, right? Now I'm going to call in that debt, right? And you need to help me in this situation.